Alright, so my name is Matt Aimonetti. I'm a Rails developer here in San Diego. I'm doing freelance job. And we're going to talk today about sexy charts in Rails. This is going to be an introduction type presentation. So I'm going to do something I never did. I'm going to try to go and do a step-by-step, and I'm going to write the code at the same time, and I'll show it to you. So we're going to talk about charts. We're not going to talk about boring charts. We're going to talk about sexy charts, which is totally different. Basically, it's just my presentation might be a bit boring, so I thought that if I would add sexy before, you guys would come. So, and that's not it. I'm going to do it in a sexy way. And I'm not going to strip because it's not going to be sexy. But I'm going to show you best practices when you develop on Rails, and we're going to do BDD today. BDD is sexy, by the way. It's not TDD, which is already sexy, but BDD is even sexier than TDD. And BDD is behavior-driven development. So basically, it's TDD, which is test-driven development, but in a sexier way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I'm going to write my test, and then I write the code, and then the test will pass. So we'll look at that, and we're going to create some sexy charts. So let's talk first about charts before I start. You'll see I don't have a lot of slides because I've been lazy and I didn't really work on my presentation. I'm sorry. But charts, you have different ways of dealing with charts. Basically, you have two ways of doing. You could do the server-side type of charts or the client-side. So if you do server-side charts, you might use something like Java or Gruff. Is it called Gruff? Gruffle? Yeah, Gruff. And basically, you will process the data and generate pictures. You're going to store on the server, and you're going to serve the image to the client. The other option is to let the client do all the job and pass the information to the client, and the client will process the information on the browser and display the information. And this time we're going to look at the client side because we can do it in a sexy way. So let's get started, and we're going to start creating a new Rails application. So I'm not going to do that. I already did that. But basically, you create a new Rails app. Everybody already created a Rails app, right? You know how to do it. So let me tell you how I do it. I use Rails Edge. So what you do is you check out Rails Edge with Subversion on your system, and then you go into the Rails folder, and then you say Rails create, and you create your own application using Rails Edge because we're really close to 2.0 release, and I want you to have all the features. So if you look at my application, I'm going to put it online, the test application. It's all 2.0. It's Rails Edge. To do that, you need to freeze Rails, and that's really easy to do. I'm not going to go into that, but that's really simple. Then, because I want to do BDD, I'm going to use my favorite testing framework. I'm going to use Rspec, and there's a Rspec on Rails plugin that we're going to use for that. Once we're done with that, we basically have a core application that has nothing in it, and we need to create the databases. And with 2.0, Rails 2.0, you can just do this rec command that you see on the screen, rec db create all, and it will create all the databases based on the database.yml file that you have. So that's also really sexy. Anyway, so we have a base application now, so we can get started. And we're going to use Rspec to generate a scaffold of the application. What I didn't tell you is that we're going to create charts to represent the population of San Diego over the few years, over the last century or something like that. Ignore what's in gray on the screen for now. We're just going to look at the first example. So in your command line, in your console, you just type script generate Rspec scaffold population, and then we're just going to have two attributes. We're going to have year and amount, the amount of people and the year, and you can see they're both integer. When you do that, Rspec is awesome, and it will use the scaffolding, the resource scaffolding that you have in Rails 2.0, and will create migration, test, model. It will actually even change the routes for you. It will do everything for you, and you have tests already written for you, and everything will pass, so you can learn from that. Once we have that, so we have our model, we have our controller, we have our migration, and we have all the tests. What we're going to do is we're going to modify a bit the migration because we already have the data we want to load in the application. So I'm just going to put all the files in a fixture file, all the information in fixture file. I'll modify the migration so when we migrate, it's going to load the migration. So let's just do that. I need to get out of here. So I have my application here. It's really tiny. So that's the base application. If I go, when I generated my Rspec thing, oh, what I didn't say, I forgot to mention that before you generate anything, you need to do rec rspec. That would put all the information for you in your system. I didn't show that, but basically when you do rec rspec, it will create this spec folder here, and we have our fixtures, we have our controllers, we have everything we need. So let's just look at the fixtures. I created two models, so we're just going to look at the populations one. And here I filled up my fixtures, and I just put all the amount I found on where did I find them? Yeah, I found that on Wikipedia. So I got the population for the last since 1850 or something like that. So I just dumped that in a fixture. I actually put 1816. So we have all these years, and we're happy with that. But we need to load them. So to load them, we'll go to our migration that were created here. And basically, by the way, notice that this is sexy migration. That's the new way of doing migration. I removed the timestamp, and here I added just 2 lines of code to require fixtures, the library, and then I'm just loading my YAML file. So now when I'm going to migrate my application, I will load all the data for me. So you probably cannot see much. I'll try to. I'm going to have to scroll a lot, but yeah. So what we do is we just load the fixture. It's really simple. You can look at the application to see how I do that. It's really not complicated. Let's go back to my presentation. So now what we do is we're going to do rec db migrate, and we're going to target the testing environment, and then we're going to start autotest. Autotest is a cool library from Zentest, and basically what it does is that it's going to run the test in the background every time you're going to save a file and see if all the tests pass. So let me go to my terminal, and I'm just going to start autotest. Autotest will load. We'll load all the tests that were generated, and we'll start running them. There we go. So it tells me I have 111 examples and 0 failure. So that's good. So now let's go back to my presentation. What do we do next? Next, we're going to load a library. So to do the charts, to do the sexy charts, we're going to use a Flash library, and I'm glad to hear that we have a few Flash developers, so you can even do a better, sexier chart library. For this example, I use a library called amCharts. It's a really cool library. It's free to use if you leave the little link that's on top, but you can buy the license for $80 or $60, I'm not sure, and then you can use it on your website without the link. You have a lot of other options. Be careful, look at the licenses. There's another big Flash chart library, but it's not really free. It's free if it's not used on a commercial website, so that's why I didn't use it. You can also use JavaScript. There is a nice library called Plotter that is nice, but you don't have all the interaction we're going to have with Flash. So anyway, just go to the website, download the library, put it in your public folder. I'll show you where it is here. So in my public folder, I have this AM column, and inside this column, sorry if you can't really see much, but whoops, where it is. There you go. So we have this am column.swf, which is the Flash file, and then we have a setting file we're going to look at later on, and we have other stuff. Basically, dump all your stuff there, and you're ready to go. We can now move on, and the first thing we want to do is to point our application to the new controller we created called population. So let's change the routes and go, so it goes directly to the charts. So let me open my routes. There we go. So here you see when I generated using Rspec scaffolding, he added the map resources automatically, so I don't need to do that. But down here, I mapped my routes to the controller populations and action index. What you also need to do is to remove the index.html that is in the public folder. That's really not hard to do, but if you forget to do that, you're not going to see anything. So now that we have that, I should be able to go to my sexy charts. Yes. And then I'm going to start my server. Right, perfect. Let's go to my browser if I can find it. Oh, it's behind. Sure. Whatever you want. Let's open the browser. Let's go. And there we go. We can see all the data. It's ugly, but it works. So we can see the year, the amount of people and stuff like that, and we can show, edit, and destroy. We don't care about all of that. So let's make all of that very sexy. And yeah, that's what we saw. I had a nice screenshot. So what we want to do is to render some XML, because the Flash library takes XML and will process this XML file and will render it into a nice chart. So because we do BDD and because we are sexy people, we're going to start by writing test. So let's do it. And what we want to do is write a test on the controller to say that when we have an XML request on the index, we want a builder to be used to return an XML file. So let's go to the code. Let's go to the specs. I go in my spec, controller, population controller. Now here I have a lot of tests that were automatically generated for me. What I'm interested in is looking at this, handling the get on populations.xml. So for those who don't know Rspec, I'm not going to tell you too much about Rspec, but basically we are mocking a call to the browser, and we see how the controller would handle the call and see the return value. So what we do is, before we run the test, we're going to mock the population model, and we actually don't need that, but that was given to me for free. And we say, well, the population class, we're going to stub it, and if there's a find on it, we're going to return this new object, which is actually a mock object. Then we mock the action, which is doGet, and we actually say, okay, the environment is application XML, so that's the MIME type. So because of that, Rails will use the respond to and send some XML back to me, at least if I put that in the code properly. Then we say it should be successful. We don't care about that. Well, actually we do. And here is the test. I already wrote it. So I say it should render using the XML builder. So I do the doGet, which is basically that up there. And I say the response should render the template populations index.xml.builder. For people who are not used to Rails 2.0 yet, we used to have builder in 1.x, and it was called the views were called RXML. And now everything was changed a bit, and if you want to render HTML, you don't use RHTML anymore, you use HTML.erb. And for the XML, we're going to do XML.builder. So let's do that. The test should run in the background. Hopefully they did not. Did I save the file? No, I did not save the file. So I'm saving the file, and it's going to run the test, and I got a failure because obviously it's not working because I didn't change the code yet. So let's go to the code. Let's go to the controller. Oh, there we go, populations controller. And you see here, we have the index controller, and we say respond to, a specific format. And we have the format.html, which that's what we saw when we went to the website and we just displayed from the browser. But we say, okay, format.xml. Now, by default, it says render XML populations. So what it does here is, by default, it's going to give you an XML of this variable here, which is basically a collection of all the population. And that's not what we want. So let's remove that. And let's say render the action index.xml.builder. And we don't want any layouts around it, so just put layout false. So let me save that. My tests are running, and woo! It passes, and I have the nice smiley. So I'm good to go. I'm not done yet because I need to work on the index builder, and that's where we're going to spend most of the time. So we need to write the builder. Now, to write the builder, basically the builder creates an XML file. But since we do BDD, we need to make sure that the view is properly generated. And since we always write tests before we write code, we need to see how to write these tests to make sure that we have a proper XML. So we're going to go to the Rspec folder, and here you have a view folder. And this view folder is used to test all the HTML views, but also the other views like XML. So here I'm going to create a file. Actually, it's already created, but index.xml.builder.erb_spec. And I'm just going to show you two ways of testing the XML. So the first thing I do is I create a mock of my objects. Basically here I'm creating populations, and that's the variable I'm going to send to the view. And for that I create two different variables, one called population 1900 and one 2000. And I will stop the year, so it's going to be always 1900, and the amount of people will be 100. And I assign these populations as an array of all of that. So the first thing we want to do is write our first test, which is already written for us here. We want the view to render the years in the series. So the way it works with amCharts is that when you create the XML file, we need to have one node that will be all the series, and then we have a node with the graph and the variables. So I'm not going to show you the XML right now, but maybe I should have done it. Anyway, so what I want to do is when I render index.xml.builder, I want the response to have a tag called value. So I want a node that is value, and I want this value to be, or the value of this node called value, I want it to be 1900, and I want to have another one which will be 2000. And these are the 2 years that we have above here stub. So these are the two populations. Another way of writing that is, if you like hprecut, which is a nice parsing library for Ruby, you can just require it here, and then you can say the document equal hprecut.xml, and then we parse the response sent back by Rspec, and then we use the nice little syntax to make sure that everything is alright. These lines do exactly the same thing. I just wanted to show you two ways of doing it. So let me save it and go to my test. Obviously it doesn't work because we didn't implement the code yet. So let's go to our view. The views here, index.xml.builder. So for those who never use the builder, it's very, very simple to use. Just look at the code later on and you can see how it works. But I create a first node called chart, and inside this node I create another nested node called series. So xml.series do, and I use a block, and I say for each population with index, so we take all the index, and then we get the information from the population object, and we get the index number. And I say XML value, so the value of the XML will be the population year. And we're going to also add a XID index. Well, it should not be here right now, but let's just do it. It's going to be faster. So let's look at the code. Yay! It passes. So that means I'm good. Let me go back to my test. Where are they? So here they are. So now what I want to make sure is that, we already did that. What I want to make sure is that my set of attributes in the series have an XID, because the XID is important for my chart library. So I set value, I use the same syntax, avtax value, and I say the value should have an attribute of XID equals 0, and that should be the first child. And I also want to have the same thing with an XID of 1 for the last child. Since we only have 2 years, it should be simple. Here again, I showed you how to use the hprequote syntax, which sometimes it's a bit nicer. So let's save that. The test will actually pass because, as I showed you earlier, I added this information here, which is what makes it pass. Alright, let's go back to our test, and this time we want to have a graph with an ID and a title. Okay, so we're rendering the same view, and we say we should have a tag. We should have a tag or a node called graph, and I should have it only once. This means I have once. If I would put 2, it would fail. And I want the graph to have an attribute called GID of San Diego, SD population, and I want the title to be San Diego population. Let me save that. It's gonna fail. Means I did a good job. I'm going back here, and here it's a bit more complicated, but it's exactly the same thing. I create a new node called graphs, and inside I'm gonna create a new node called graph with a title of San Diego population and then a GID of San Diego. And I'm doing some other stuff that I should not do right now, so let me just remove that. So, yay, passes. I'm happy. Oh, by the way, when it passes, it would rerun all the tests that you have, so you're sure you're not breaking anything. Alright, so let's go a bit faster. Next thing I want to do is I want the graph to have nested value, because if I don't have all the values for the graph, it's kind of useless. So I want the graph, I want a node, I want to have at least a node value inside the graph, and I want that the first value node in the graph has a value of 100. Watch 100 being the amount of population in 1900 according to my mocks. I save that. It fails. Yeah. I'm going back to my code, and here I'm adding my value with my XID. And then it passes. Perfect. Good. Okay, I'm not gonna do that right now. Let's see. Now what I'm saying, oh yeah, I already did that. Here I'm just saying the value needs to have an attribute XID. So I already did that, so it's gonna pass. Okay. Now what I'm doing here is I'm saying that the graph nested values should have a color. So I'm saying graph should have a child called value, and it needs to have a color attribute. Yay, it fails. So now I'm going there, and I'm saying, well, we want a color attribute. Let's just add a color attribute. Saving. Yay, passes. The last thing we want to do, I think that's it. We now have a proper XML. So if we want to check it out, what we can do is to go to our website. Oh, it's just behind that. And here, if I go to populations, I'm going to the same index, but if I add at the end .xml, I'm gonna make a request, and I'll get my chart. And I can see everything is alright, and I knew it was alright because all my tests passed, but I can see all the value, and that's exactly what the library needs. So we're good to go. Let's see my notes. Oh yeah, what we need to do also is to pass the link to this XML to Flash, because Flash runs on the client side and it needs to know where to find the XML file. So what we want is to create a variable that would contain or hold the data link of the XML, the URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a small test again because we do BDD. So I'm going to go to my view index.xml spec, and here when I say I do the same mocking, and I will just say when you render the HTML version, make sure actually that's not that, sorry, I need to look at the controller, and I need to say I need to make sure I have a variable called population_data URL that is generated automatically for me, that is available to the view. And it should be my test host population.xml. So that's my test. Once again, it's gonna fail. I'm going to my controller. I'm going to my controller, population controller, and here I'm creating population, so I'm creating this variable, and here I use a nice name routes. I'm not going to go into name routes here, but basically when you use RESTful routes, you can just call your routes this way. So you could just do populations.url, but since we want to have a formatted URL to go to the XML, I'm just saying formatted_population.url, and we get that for free because I put it in my routes. So that's really cool. And my test just passed because I added that. So now that we have this information available in the view, what I need to do is to get my Flash object to load and display all this XML. So the first thing to do is to create a generic layout so we can have a header to the page. I'm going back to my views. Here you have a layout folder, and what I did, I just created an application.html.erb, which means it's a generic layout that will be used by all the views, unless I have another layout specific for this one. And I have a very simple HTML layout. The only thing I do here is I'm loading this SWF object, which is a nice JavaScript library that was provided with the amCharts library, but it's a third-party JavaScript. Will just verify that you have Flash, and if you don't have Flash, it will display another content. So we need to include that in the header. For those who are really new to Rails, here we're just yielding the body so we can use the view, and the view will be inserted inside this layout. So now I have my my header. I'm loading SWF objects. What else? So I need to create a holding div. Yeah, the way it works with SWF objects is that you create a holding div where you put the content that is used if you don't have Flash. For instance, when Google search bot will come to your website and it will look at the content if Google search bot doesn't have Flash. If you're using your iPhone, you don't have Flash. So you want to display another alternative content. So for that, you create this holding div that will be replaced by Flash if the user has Flash. So that's what I started doing earlier. I'll go to my test, to my HTML, and here I say, well, I should have a tag. We want to have an ID tag called San Diego _population. So it should fail. Yeah, I can hear it, but yeah. So it fails because I don't have this ID in the view. I'm going to my views, and they're actually here. And let's not look at that yet. So this is the generated views by the Rspec scaffold. What we want is here to create this div with an ID of San Diego population. And I just put dummy text. You probably want to have the information in a table or something like that, so people can get the information even though they don't see the Flash sexy chart. So this div, the San Diego underscore population, will be overridden by the Flash object. So don't worry about what you put here. If people have Flash, it will be replaced. But it's really important that you have some information so people can still see something. So let me save that. The test will pass. Yeah, they just passed. Oh no, not yet. So they passed, so I'm good. The next thing to do is here to use SWF object to generate the Flash object, or to call the Flash object. So here is the snippet of JavaScript. You can just use, SWF object is one option you can use also. There's another library called UFO. But basically it does the same. It's getting the SWF object, which is the chart library. I'm saying, it's gonna be 800 pixel wide, 380 high, and I'm requiring Flash 8 minimum. And I have a background this color. Then I'm adding some variables that are needed by the library, and that's very simple. And here I'm saying, well, the setting files is here. So this is going to be the setting files we're going to look at to put all the settings for the charts to look different. I could also put all the information here if I wanted to, but we're not going to do that. We don't need it because we're not changing the settings all the time. And here, that's the important part, I need to say the data file is, and here I'm using Ruby to display the link that we just generated a bit earlier that we made available to the view. So now that I have that, I'm going to load everything. So if I go to the website, which is just behind, and I reload this page in HTML, so now I can see some really sexy charts. So it's kind of too big. So you can see we have some of the Flash goodies. We also have a rollover. That's really nice. And you can change all the settings using the XML file. You can see, I actually tweaked it a bit. But what I don't really like with this chart is that it's all the same color. As you can see, it's all kind of orange. I like to have like darker colors when we have more people and kind of lighter. So let's look at how you do that. And it's really easy. If you just look at the library, they just tell you in the XML file you can put the information for each value. You can assign a color. But since we're generating everything on the fly, what we're going to do is just go to our builder in the view. Here it is. And here I use a simple case switch. And what I'm saying is when the value is between 0 and 10,000, I want the graph to be this color, which is a lighter color. When the value is between 10,000 and 100,000, I want this color. And you just use a very simple case switch, but when you will generate the XML file, now each value or each value for the graph will have a different color based on the amount. And that's really, really simple, and that's really easy to read, and you can just change that. And Ruby is awesome because, it's really, really simple. So anyway, now that I'm gonna save that, it will regenerate the XML for me. So if I reload that, now you can see we have different colors, and that's kind of cool. So it gets darker and darker if you have more people. All the settings could be put in the XML file, but usually you don't really want to do that because the settings are always the same. So what you can do is just go to the XML file, which is in the public folder. amCharts. Here is my settings file. And I just use the default one, which has a lot of comments, so you want to clean up the comments once you're done. But it's very well documented, and you can set a lot of different settings, like the font, the size, the color for the tooltips. If you want different labels on the side, you can see I put labels, one here and one here. Title, you can put whatever you want. If you generate a lot of charts, which I usually do, I put some of these settings, like the main label here, I put it in the main XML. So since it's always different. But the rest, all the colors and stuff, I just put it in the settings. And the library is nice. You can display different ways. I don't have internet, so I cannot really show you here, but you have a lot of different ways of displaying your charts. And it's really cool. It makes the job of doing charts very, very simple. It's also really easy to talk with Flash. You know, I'm not a designer, and usually I don't really like using Flash. I like having other people using Flash. Usually they want me to communicate with their stuff. And having Rails generating XML and sending it to Flash to parse is really, really simple. I mean, if we look at the builder that I created here, where is it? I mean, that's it. I created a full XML, and that was really, really simple, easy to debug. We have full tests for that, so if we need to make any modification, we can do that. We will see if we break anything. That's just awesome. And then you can just enjoy it. I think that's it. Is there any questions? No questions? Yes?
If you wanted to create an SVG,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way for Flash to render SVG?
I'm not a Flash expert, so I don't know. But you need a library to generate SVG somehow. Why would you generate SVG from Flash? You want people to save the chart on their computer? Is that what you want to do?
Just as an alternative way of displaying the chart.
Oh, I see.
So you generate an SVG of the chart, and then render it through Flash.
I'm not sure. Sorry. But what you can do, and I didn't tell you about that, is when you're looking at the chart, and I didn't put this option in that, but when you right click, you can have the option to save the image, and it will basically save the chart onto the client as an image. But I don't really think you can do SVG and render them by Flash. It would not make really much sense because you have to load the big image when the XML. Well, I don't know. Any other questions? Yeah?
Using the hashtag
Mm-hmm.
the apricot
Mm-hmm.
is the same. Is it like exactly the same, or is it, in other words, is the hashtag using apricot underneath?
No. The hashtag basically is a wrapper for asserts select, and it's not using apricot. So it's using the built-in library, which I never really dug into. Just look at the documentation. I started using apricot, to be honest with you, and if you go to Rails on the Run, my blog, you can see I show how to use it with apricot because I like apricot a lot, and I think it's really easy to parse XML and HTML and stuff like that. But sometimes it's just easier to use avtag, and avtag has a lot of options because it's using assert select. So go to the web, look at the assert select documentation, and you'll see all the different options. Like I didn't know about this first value. You see, let me show you. Oh, by the way, in this example application I'm going to put on the web, I also did lines. So it's not as sexy, so I didn't show them to you. But if we go to averages, we have lines. So here it's just the temperature in San Diego, the high and the lows. And here I also wrote some specs, and if I find them, averages, index. You see, when you have something like, where is it? Right, this one. This one was a bit tricky. I didn't know how to do it, and nobody knew. I couldn't find anybody to tell me how to do it. But here I'm saying, okay, in the document, I need to have a node called value, and I want the first child to have an attribute xid, and I want this attribute to be 0, right? So that's what I did here, which makes a lot of sense to me using apricot. Now, I couldn't find a way to do that with fTag, and basically it's because you need to use first child, last child. You can have end child. You can do a lot of fancy stuff, but you need to look into assert select for that. But there was not a single example I could not do with fTag, so I guess you're good.
Is that part of the parentheses there in the example? Is that basically just XPath?
Yeah, basically it is, yeah. And you can use XPath or you can use the CSS selection type stuff. But
Well, so you should select all the way on its back end is that path.
right.
So, at least theoretically, the HTML method should be faster.
It should be faster, yes. And that's kind of why I used it also at the beginning, but, well, no, that's not true. The real reason is because I didn't know how to do it the other way. But you can see here, I'm kind of mixing things. I'm saying, well, take the graph and then go under, take the first child and blah, blah, blah. Any other questions?
That concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.